My parents demanded I pay $300,000 for my golden child sister's dream wedding. When I refused, they forged my signature on a massive loan against my properties to steal the money anyway. So, I initiated a forensic audit, exposed their decades of embezzlement, and legally repossessed their home on the morning of the ceremony. I'm a 30-year-old structural engineer and a real estate investor. I grew up in a household built entirely on a foundation of lies and brutal, calculated emotional neglect. My parents only valued people based on two metrics: their outward appearance and how useful they were to my younger sister, Olivia. Olivia is 27, and she is the definition of a golden child who has been allowed to completely detach from reality. She never held a job for more than 3 weeks, claiming standard work environments crushed her creativity. Instead, she fancies herself a luxury lifestyle influencer, meaning my parents have spent 20 years bankrupting themselves to fund her designer handbags, international vacations, and high-end lease cars so she can pretend to be a multi-millionaire on social media. I, conversely, was the invisible child. I spent my entire high school career working two jobs, one at a fast food restaurant and one as a janitor, just to pay for my own clothes, school supplies, and a $500 sedan I bought with a seized engine and fixed myself. When I got into a prestigious engineering university, my father laughed and said it was a waste of time for a man to obsess over numbers. They refused to co-sign my student loans, claiming they needed to save their credit to finance Olivia's debutante ball. I put my head down, worked 3 jobs, and eventually graduated near the top of my class. I started investing in distressed multifamily properties when the real estate market crashed. By the time I was 30, I owned a portfolio of 30 perfectly renovated units that were cash flowing massive profits. I was a quiet, private multimillionaire. My parents had absolutely no idea how wealthy I was because I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment and dressed in cheap utility clothes. They viewed me as a pathetic failure who worked 90-hour weeks for a standard salary. About 6 months ago, Olivia got engaged. Her fiancé, Ethan, comes from an old-money, aristocratic family that views my parents as vulgar and nouveau riche. Marcus and Brenda, my parents, were absolutely desperate to impress Ethan's parents and secure their place in the upper echelons of society through this marriage. They decided that the only way to do that was to throw a $300,000 royal-style wedding. The venue was a historic, sprawling castle. The catering was 5-star, and Olivia's dress was a custom designer piece that cost more than my first duplex. The main problem, however, was that my parents were completely broke. They had spent every single penny of their retirement savings and maxed out multiple high-limit credit cards just to sustain Olivia's fake influencer lifestyle for the last decade. They had absolutely zero cash to pay for the venue deposit, the dress, or the international travel. 4 months before the wedding, I was at my properties, repairing a water line in a crawl space covered in mud and grime. My phone started ringing. It was my father demanding I come to their house immediately for a critical family financial strategy session. I drove over, not even stopping to shower. I walked into their house, which was cluttered with luxury furniture they could not afford, looking like a construction worker. Olivia was sitting in a velvet chair, scrolling through social media, while my mother was crying theatrically into a handkerchief. My father sat me down and did not even ask how I was doing. He simply slid a 30-page stack of color gloss brochures for the wedding venue and the vendors across the mahogany table. As we have discussed, Olivia deserves the wedding of her dreams. My father began using his booming, authoritative voice. Because of the unfortunate seasonal nature of my business and some unexpected tax issues, our liquid capital is tied up. We have already negotiated with Ethan's family regarding the dowry and the future estate, but we need to cover the $300,000 wedding costs up front to maintain our social standing. So what do you want from me? I asked, wiping grease from my hands onto a paper towel. We have calculated that based on your age and your tenure as an engineer, your debt-to-income ratio is likely pristine. My mother added, peeking over her handkerchief. We have already pre-approved you for a signature loan. We just need you to come to the bank on Tuesday and sign the guarantee paperwork for the full $300,000. You are unmarried and have no children. You have virtually no expenses. It is only fair that you contribute to your sister's happiness. I almost laughed out loud. You're demanding I take out a $300,000 high-interest personal loan to pay for a single one-day party for Olivia? I asked. Think of it as an investment in the family legacy. Olivia replied, not even looking up from her phone. Once I marry Ethan, his family will likely help you get much better jobs. We are trying to lift you up and all you care about is money. Family is supposed to help family. My answer was simple, flat, and absolute. No. I am not taking out a massive loan for this. I cannot afford it, and I would not pay it if I could. Figure it out yourselves. I stood up from the table and walked out of the house. My father followed me into the driveway, shouting that I was a greedy traitor, a parasite, and that I was dead to them. My mother screamed that I was actively trying to ruin my sister's life out of jealousy. After that meeting, I cut contact with them completely. I blocked their phone numbers and their social media. I dove back into my work, finalizing the renovation of my flagship properties. I felt an immense sense of peace, believing that the $300,000 demand was the absolute apex of their audacity. I was completely, utterly wrong. I severely underestimated the depths of their depravity, their arrogance, and their terrifying commitment to maintaining their public image, even if it meant destroying my entire life to do so. For 3 entire months, I lived in absolute peace. I finalized the renovations on my properties, secured long-term commercial tenants, and watched my business accounts grow. I thought my parents had finally given up and accepted that I was no longer their personal ATM. I was incredibly naive. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 month before Olivia's massive royal wedding, I went to my corporate post office box to collect the weekly mail for my real estate business. Mixed in with the standard utility bills and tenant correspondence was a thick, certified letter from a major commercial bank. I did not hold any accounts with this specific bank, so I assumed it was just aggressive marketing material. I tore open the envelope while sitting in the front seat of my truck. It was not marketing material. It was a formal notice of default and intent to accelerate a commercial loan. The letter stated that my limited liability company had missed the first scheduled monthly payment on a $300,000 commercial line of credit. The collateral legally listed to secure the massive loan was my flagship 30-unit apartment building, the crown jewel of my entire real estate portfolio. My heart completely stopped. The blood drained from my face, and the world seemed to tilt sideways. I had never applied for a commercial line of credit. I had never pledged my flagship building as collateral for anything. My properties were entirely paid off. I drove straight to the downtown branch of that commercial bank, breaking several speed limits along the way. I walked into the lobby, slapped the default notice on the receptionist's desk, and demanded an emergency meeting with the branch manager. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a glass-walled office, my hands shaking with absolute fury while the manager pulled up the loan origination file on his computer. He printed out the master loan agreement and slid it across the desk. I looked at the final page. Right there on the bottom line was my signature, but it was not my handwriting. It was a clumsy, desperate forgery. Someone had illegally signed my name to secure a $300,000 loan. But how did they pledge my building? I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. A forged signature is not enough to mortgage a commercial property. You need corporate authorization. The branch manager looked nervous. He flipped to the next page in the file. He showed me a notarized corporate resolution document. My stomach dropped into my shoes. My father, Marcus, was listed on the document as the senior managing member of my limited liability company. Suddenly, the entire sickening conspiracy clicked into place. When I bought my very first duplex at the age of 22, before I had a formal corporate office, I used my parents' home address as the official mailing address for the state business registry. I had changed it years ago, but my father had somehow kept copies of my old corporate filing numbers. He had gone online, filed a fraudulent annual report with the state, and illegally added his own name as a managing officer of my company. Using that fake corporate authority, he walked into this bank, pledged my 30-unit apartment building as collateral, and forged my personal signature as the guarantor. I looked at the branch manager, my eyes burning. Where did the money go? I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. The manager pulled up the wire transfer receipt. The full $300,000 had been disbursed exactly 3 months ago. It was wired directly into a joint personal checking account owned by Marcus and Brenda. They had stolen my corporate identity, mortgaged the life's work I bled for, and walked away with a massive pile of cash to pay for the castle venue, the designer dress, and the 5-star catering for Olivia's wedding. If this loan remains in default, the manager said nervously, the bank will have no choice but to initiate commercial foreclosure proceedings on the 30-unit property. I walked out of the bank in a complete daze. My parents had not just crossed a boundary. They had committed massive federal wire fraud, corporate identity theft, and grand larceny. They had put a loaded gun to the head of my entire financial future just so they could impress a wealthy, aristocratic family for one single afternoon. If I called the police right then, the authorities would freeze the accounts, but my parents might be tipped off. They might try to hide whatever cash was left, or worse, they might try to flee. I did not just want to stop them. I wanted to completely and utterly destroy them. I drove directly to the most ruthless, terrifying commercial litigation and corporate fraud attorney in the city. His name was Victor. He was a former federal prosecutor who specialized in dismantling white-collar criminal syndicates. I walked into his opulent office, dropped the forged loan documents on his desk, and told him the entire story. Victor read through the paperwork in complete silence. When he finished, he looked up at me, and a cold, predatory smile spread across his face. "This is not a family dispute," Victor said, tapping his expensive pen against the forged signature. "This is a massive, multi-count federal indictment waiting to happen. Your father pierced the corporate veil to steal from your business. Because he used a fraudulent corporate resolution to commit a felony, we do not just have the right to void this loan. We have the legal right to pierce his personal assets to recover the stolen funds." Victor immediately pulled up a comprehensive background check on my parents. He discovered exactly what I suspected. My parents were completely drowning in consumer debt. Their credit cards were maxed out, but they had exactly one major asset left. The massive, sprawling suburban home they used to pretend they were wealthy was completely paid off. It had roughly $400,000 in clean, untouchable equity. We are going to file a massive civil lawsuit against them for fraud and conversion, Victor explained, his eyes gleaming. And we are going to file an emergency writ of attachment directly against their personal home. It acts as an absolute legal freeze. They will not be able to sell it, refinance it, or use it for bail money. So we hit them now? I asked, clenching my fists. Victor shook his head slowly. No. We hit them perfectly. When is this magnificent royal wedding taking place? Exactly 4 weeks from Saturday, I replied. Victor smiled again. Then we wait, he said. We let them spend the stolen money. We let them sign every single non-refundable contract with the castle venue and the caterers. We let them send out the lavish invitations to all their wealthy, snobby friends. We let them build their entire house of cards up to the absolute sky. And then, on the morning of the wedding, we kicked the foundation out from under them. The next 4 weeks were an absolute masterclass in psychological endurance. I did not block Olivia's social media on my secondary accounts. I watched every single video and read every single post. I needed to see exactly where my stolen money was going. She posted a 20-minute video touring the historic castle venue, bragging about the imported Italian marble floors and the custom crystal chandeliers. She posted pictures of her massive, custom-tailored designer gown that cost over $20,000. She showed off the invitations, which were printed on thick, gold leaf parchment and delivered by specialized couriers to 300 of the wealthiest socialites in the city. My parents were in the background of almost every video, drinking expensive champagne, looking incredibly smug, and pretending they were aristocratic royalty. They had absolutely no idea that while they were busy tasting imported caviar and picking out 5-star catering menus, Victor and I were sitting in a dark, quiet conference room, meticulously drafting a weapon of mass financial destruction. Victor was a genius. He explained that if we simply sued them, they could quickly sell their house, hide the cash in offshore accounts, and declare bankruptcy to avoid paying the judgment. To prevent that, Victor filed a massive multi-count civil lawsuit for corporate identity theft, conversion of funds, and civil fraud. But the absolute masterstroke was the ex parte emergency injunction. Because we had undeniable physical proof of the forged bank documents and the wire transfer receipts, a superior court judge reviewed our file in a closed-door chamber. The judge recognized the massive flight risk and the ongoing dissipation of stolen assets. He immediately granted our request. He signed a comprehensive writ of attachment against their sprawling suburban home, and he signed a blanket freeze order on every single bank account associated with their social security numbers. But Victor did not file the orders with the banks immediately. We waited. We let them spend roughly $200,000 of the stolen loan on the non-refundable venue deposits, the designer clothes, and the lavish decorations. We waited until the absolute point of no return. The royal wedding was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. The ceremony was supposed to begin at 2 o'clock. On Friday afternoon, at exactly 4:59, 1 minute before the financial institutions closed for the weekend, Victor's paralegals executed the judicial orders. They electronically served the asset freezes to my parents' primary banks and their credit card companies. In the span of 60 seconds, my parents' checking accounts, their savings accounts, and their high-limit credit cards were completely and utterly locked. My parents did not notice. They were entirely too busy at the lavish, catered rehearsal dinner, drinking expensive wine, and giving arrogant speeches about their family legacy. The trap snapped completely shut on Saturday morning. At 8 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. It was Victor. He told me to put on my best suit and meet him at a small coffee shop just 2 blocks away from my parents' house. When I arrived, Victor was sitting at a corner table, sipping a black espresso. Sitting next to him was a massive, intimidating man wearing a tactical vest and a badge. It was an armed county process server, authorized by the Superior Court to deliver emergency legal documents. "It is starting," Victor said, checking his expensive watch. "The venue and the high-end vendors require their final day of payments to be cleared before they begin setting up the chairs, the flowers, and the catering tents. Your father just tried to swipe his credit card to pay the florist $25,000 for the imported roses." I smiled, feeling a cold rush of adrenaline. "And?" I asked. "Declined," Victor replied softly. "He just tried his debit card. Frozen. We are giving them exactly 1 hour to completely panic. Then we knock on the door." At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the 3 of us pulled into my parents' sprawling driveway. The house was an absolute hive of chaotic energy. There were 3 vans parked on the lawn belonging to elite makeup artists and hairstylists. Bridesmaids in matching silk robes were running back and forth across the windows. We walked up to the heavy mahogany front door. The armed process server did not knock politely. He pounded his heavy fist against the wood 3 times, the sound echoing like a gunshot over the manicured suburban lawns. A few moments later, my mother yanked the door open. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair half pinned up in elaborate curls. Her face was flushed red, and she was holding her cell phone to her ear, looking absolutely frantic. When she saw me standing on her porch, standing next to a man in a tactical vest, her jaw completely dropped. She slowly lowered the phone from her ear. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her eyes darting nervously up and down the street. "You're not invited to this wedding? You're supposed to be out of our lives." "I'm not here for the wedding, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "I am here for my $300,000. My mother turned the color of wet ash. She stumbled backward into the foyer. "Marcus." She screamed, her voice cracking with pure terror. "Marcus, get out here right now." My father came running out of the home office. He was wearing an incredibly expensive, custom-tailored tuxedo, but he looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He was clutching a stack of declining credit cards in his shaking hands. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me, Victor, and the armed officer standing in his hallway. "What is this?" my father demanded, trying to summon his booming, authoritative voice, but failing completely. "We are in the middle of a massive banking error. The bank locked our accounts by mistake, and the vendors are threatening to walk out. Get out of my house." "It is not a banking error, Marcus," Victor said, stepping forward smoothly. He pulled a thick, heavy stack of legal documents out of his waterproof briefcase and handed them directly to the armed process server. The process server stepped right up to my father. "Marcus and Brenda," he said, his voice loud and official. "You have been legally served." He slapped the massive stack of papers directly against my father's chest. My father reflexively grabbed them. Victor looked at my parents, his eyes cold and predatory. "I'm the senior litigation counsel for your son's real estate holding company," Victor explained. "Yesterday afternoon, a Superior Court judge reviewed the forged commercial loan documents you submitted to the bank. The judge reviewed the fraudulent corporate resolution you created to illegally pledge a 30-unit apartment building as collateral. Because of the overwhelming evidence of felony corporate fraud, the judge granted our emergency injunction." My father began to physically shake. He looked down at the papers in his hands. The top page was a massive, bold legal summons for a civil lawsuit. "Your bank accounts are not experiencing an error," Victor continued, perfectly articulating every single word. "They are legally frozen by court order to prevent you from hiding stolen assets. Furthermore, if you look at page 4 of that packet, you will see a recorded writ of attachment. It is a legal lien against this entire property. You no longer have any equity. You cannot borrow money against this house, and you cannot sell it. It belongs to the court until you pay back every single penny you stole from your son." From the top of the sweeping wooden staircase, a loud, dramatic gasp echoed through the foyer. I looked up. Olivia was standing on the landing, wearing her massive $20,000 custom designer wedding gown. She looked like a princess, but her face was twisted into a mask of absolute horror. "Mom." Olivia cried out, her voice trembling. "Dad, what is he talking about?" "The venue coordinator just called me. He said, if we do not wire the final $70,000 in the next 20 minutes, they are locking the gates to the castle and sending the catering staff home." My mother collapsed onto the expensive hallway rug, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. My father stood completely paralyzed, his custom tuxedo suddenly looking like a clown suit. "Tell her, Marcus," I said, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. "Tell your perfect golden child how you paid for her royal wedding. Tell her you stole my identity, forged my signature, and mortgaged my business to fund her fake influencer lifestyle." Olivia let out a terrifying, piercing scream. She gathered the massive skirts of her $20,000 dress and ran down the stairs, completely ignoring my parents. She ran straight up to me, her eyes wide with desperation. "Please," she begged, grabbing the lapels of my cheap suit jacket. "Please, you have to fix this. The guests are already arriving at the hotels. Ethan's parents are going to be there in 2 hours. If the venue cancels, his family will be humiliated. They will call off the wedding. You have millions of dollars. Just pay the vendors and let me get married." I looked down at my sister. I looked at the $20,000 dress she was wearing, paid for with money she had effectively stolen from the business I built with my own 2 hands. I reached up and slowly, firmly removed her hands from my jacket. "I am not paying for a single thing, Olivia," I replied softly. "I told you 4 months ago. Figure it out yourselves." I turned around, walked out the heavy mahogany front doors, and walked back to my truck. Behind me, the absolute catastrophic destruction of my family's entire fake empire had officially begun. I did not stick around to watch the rest of the meltdown. I got into my truck with Victor and the process server, and we drove away from the sprawling suburban house. But I did not have to be there to know exactly what happened next, because the absolute collapse of the royal wedding became the most legendary scandal in the history of our city's high society. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the floral company, having completely failed to run my father's frozen credit cards, ordered their staff to load the tens of thousands of dollars worth of imported roses back into their delivery trucks. The 5-star catering company, realizing they were not going to receive their final $70,000 payment, packed up their portable kitchens, took the imported caviar and champagne, and completely abandoned the castle venue. By noon, the massive historic castle was entirely empty. There were no chairs, no flowers, no food, and no music. At 1 o'clock, the first wave of elite, wealthy guests began to arrive in their luxury vehicles. They walked into a cold, barren stone courtyard. And then, Ethan and his aristocratic parents arrived in their chauffeured limousine. Ethan's father, an incredibly proud and strict man, demanded to know what was going on. My father, sweating profusely in his custom tuxedo, tried to spin a pathetic web of lies about a banking error and a vendor mix-up. But Ethan was not stupid. He demanded to see the venue coordinator. The coordinator, who was furious about the unpaid bills, told Ethan's family the exact truth. He told them that Marcus and Brenda's bank accounts were entirely locked by a superior court judge due to a massive civil lawsuit for corporate fraud. Ethan's parents were absolutely disgusted. They realized instantly that my parents were not wealthy socialites. They were completely broke, desperate frauds who had stolen money just to buy their way into an aristocratic family. Ethan's father looked at my parents like they were trash on the bottom of his shoe. He ordered Ethan to get back into the limousine immediately. Olivia, wearing her $20,000 custom designer gown, ran across the cobblestone courtyard, sobbing hysterically, begging Ethan not to leave. Ethan did not even look at her. He got into the car, rolled up the tinted window, and the chauffeur drove away. The royal wedding was officially canceled. But the social humiliation was absolutely nothing compared to the legal hurricane that made landfall on Monday morning. Victor had not just filed a civil lawsuit. He had also sent the undeniable proof of the forged commercial loan documents directly to the fraud department of the commercial bank. The bank, realizing they had been completely defrauded out of $300,000, immediately contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On Wednesday morning, while my parents were sitting in their silent, depressing living room, trying to figure out how to buy groceries with completely frozen accounts, 3 black federal vehicles pulled into their driveway. Federal agents wearing tactical windbreakers kicked the heavy mahogany front doors open. They executed a massive search warrant, seizing my parents' computers, their financial records, and their cell phones. My father and my mother were handcuffed in their own living room, read their rights, and arrested for massive federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. Because Victor had attached the incredibly restrictive writ of attachment to their house, my parents had absolutely zero collateral to offer a bail bondsman. The federal magistrate judge, noting the severity of the crimes and the massive amount of stolen money, set their bail at $250,000 each. They could not pay a single dime of it. They were transferred to a federal holding facility, trading their custom tuxedos and silk robes for standard-issue prison uniforms. While they sat in federal custody, Victor and I moved entirely unopposed in civil court. Because they were incarcerated and could not afford private defense attorneys, they defaulted on my civil lawsuit. The Superior Court judge reviewed the wire transfers and granted me a massive judgment of $350,000 to cover the stolen principal and my exorbitant legal fees. To satisfy the judgment, Victor legally foreclosed on their sprawling suburban home. We literally repossessed the house they loved more than their own son. Because the market was incredibly hot, Victor auctioned the property off in less than 30 days. After paying off their minimal remaining mortgage, the auction generated exactly enough equity to entirely repay the forged commercial loan. I took the cashier's check directly to the commercial bank, handed it to the branch manager, and watched him permanently clear the fraudulent debt from my limited liability company. My flagship 30-unit apartment building was completely safe, entirely free, and clear once again. The criminal justice system was not nearly as kind to my parents as the civil courts. Facing an absolute maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison for defrauding a financial institution, my parents completely broke down. Their overworked public defenders told them they had absolutely no defense. They had left a massive, undeniable paper trail. 9 months later, they accepted a harsh plea deal. I sat in the very back row of the federal courthouse and watched the judge deliver their sentences. My father, who used to laugh at me for working hard, wept openly like a child. They were each sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of strict supervised release. But the most spectacular, satisfying downfall belonged entirely to Olivia. Without my parents to steal for her, and without Ethan's aristocratic money to support her, Olivia's fake influencer lifestyle completely evaporated overnight. She was 27 years old with absolutely no college degree, no marketable skills, and a completely blank resume. She tried to move in with some of her wealthy socialite friends, but the moment they found out her parents were convicted federal felons, they completely cut her out of their social circles. She was entirely toxic. Last I heard, Olivia had to sell her designer handbags and her expensive shoes just to afford the security deposit on a tiny, cramped studio apartment in a very bad part of the city. She is currently working 40 hours a week as a cashier at a discount retail store. She has to wear a terrible polyester uniform, and she takes the public bus to work every single morning because her leased luxury car was repossessed. She is finally painfully living in the exact reality she spent her entire life trying to avoid. I am currently 32 years old. My real estate portfolio has doubled in size. I own 60 perfectly renovated units, and my corporate accounts are overflowing. I recently bought a beautiful, secluded cabin in the mountains, surrounded by acres of quiet forest. I have a wonderful, peaceful life, entirely free from the toxic manipulation and the endless financial demands of the people who were supposed to protect me. My parents spent their entire lives obsessing over their public image. They thought that looking wealthy was more important than actually being honest. They thought I was just a quiet, invisible worker bee they could crush whenever they needed extra honey. They learned the most devastating lesson of their lives. When you push the invisible child into a corner and you threaten the empire he built with his own two hands, he does not just fight back. He becomes the architect of your absolute destruction.